How many filters are on your car and how often do you service them? This time on Talking Vehicles with Joe. As you know, I'm doing a series of videos on vehicle maintenance. And one of the items that is absolutely a maintenance item on your vehicle is the filters that are on it. Now, we're all familiar with the oil filter, of course, because when we get an oil change, the oil filter gets changed too. Although interestingly, there was a time in the 1970s through the 1980s where vehicle manufacturers actually allowed you to skip changing the filter on every other oil change. In other words, you do an initial oil change, let's say it's 7,500 miles, and then you could let your vehicle go to 15,000 miles more, to 22,500 miles before you'd have to change the filter again. Now, they recommended that you drained the oil at 15,000 miles and replaced it, but you didn't have to change the filter at that interval. Well, that pretty much has gone by the wayside, and all the manufacturers are recommending you change the filter when you change the oil. So everybody knows about the oil filter, but what other filters are there on your car? I think there's a couple that are really important that get overlooked. One of them is actually probably three of them. One of them is the engine air filter. This is the filter that's up in the engine compartment that filters the air that comes into your engine. Now that's really critical because the air contains dust and dirt particles that you don't want getting into the engine because they can become abrasive inside the cylinders and do damage. So we want the air to be as filtered and as free of those particles as possible before it gets into the intake system and combines with the fuel to be drawn into the cylinder to burn. Most manufacturers have an interval that they recommend that you change the engine air filter. Typically, it's around 30,000 miles. And under normal conditions, that may be about right. But under conditions where there's excessive dust or dirt, if you live in a dusty area, you drive on dirt roads, see dust being kicked up. And recently we had the forest fires in Canada. So if you're up in the northern part of the country, there was a high concentration of soot in the air from the forest fires. You may want to change that filter more frequently. Best thing to do is to pull it out and have a look at it. And, everybody has a different opinion about what it constitutes the condition that the filter needs to be changed. Some people will shine a light through it to see if the light shines through. And if it does, they'll take like a drop light or some type of a handheld light and shine it through the filter to see if it shines through. And if it does, hey, it's okay. You can still use it. Those filters are not terribly expensive. Somewhere between $25 and $50. And so I think, a more frequent change interval of 20,000 or maybe even 15,000 miles might be appropriate because you want as much air going into the engine as possible. When those filters become restricted, the amount of air that can get through them is restricted, and that will change the way the computer has to operate to get the proper air-fuel mixture. And it will mean that your vehicle will be operating less efficiently. So frequent air filter changes, maybe more often than what the manufacturer recommends, will assure you that your engine can perform properly and you'll get the best fuel economy and power from it. Now, two other filters to think about. Number one is the cabin air filter. This is the filter that's in the HVAC system that filters the air before it comes into the inside of the interior of the car. Typically, they're found inside the when you can drop the glove box down, and in the glove box there'll be a compartment you can open, and that filter will slide out. Although that's not always the case. Those filters should be changed probably just about as often, if not more often, than the engine air filter. Changing those filters once a year is probably not out of line. It's just like a furnace filter that you have in your furnace. A lot of times you change your furnace, maybe you don't, but you should change your furnace filter at least once a year, if not twice. And same thing with that cabin air filter in your car. You'd be amazed when you pull that thing out. You might see some little broken pieces of leaves in there, or other little broken pieces of residue that have gotten through the air intake system, and the filter has trapped them. And again, you want that filter to be nice and clean so that the fans that move the air into the cabin don't have to work as hard to get the air inside. And if they have to work harder to get the amount of air into the cabin that will keep you comfortable, they'll work harder and they'll wear out more quickly. So you're doing this maintenance protects your fans that move the air through the HVAC system. The final filter I want to talk about is the fuel filter. Again, I think it's a filter that's forgotten. Most people don't think about. When you've driven your car, I saw a statistic that said when you've driven your car 20,000 miles, that filter has filtered something like 150,000 gallons of gasoline. Now, this filter is typically in the fuel line underneath the car. And the filter is not usually easily serviceable by a do-it-yourselfer. Usually it's recommended that you have a professional do that, because it's typically below the gas tank or at gas tank level. So if you take it out of the line, if you remove the clamps and take the filter out, and there's fuel in the tank, the fuel is going to want to drain out of the tank, and you'll have a big mess and a potential fire hazard. Best leaving that service to a professional. And frankly, probably every 25,000, maybe 30,000 miles, that filter should be serviced and changed. Now you say, wait a minute, how does dirt get into the gas tank? Well, there's always a little bit of rust and corrosion, because you'll get water in your gas tank, and over time it'll begin to rust, and you might start getting a little bit of corrosion from that. Although gas stations today do a wonderful job of keeping their tanks rust and corrosion free. A lot of times the tanks are not even metal. The gas tanks are not even metal, they're plastic. But, opening up the lid and attaching the hose to fill the gas tank up can possibly let some contamination get in there. And it's nowhere near as bad as it used to be. You used to have to change your fuel filter like every year. And you don't have to do that now, but it's still recommended to change your fuel filter on a regular basis. Again, I picked the target of 25 to 30,000 miles to have mine serviced. And make sure, because it's easier on the fuel pump. You have an electric fuel pump that's pushing fuel up into the fuel line to get it up into the engine. If that filter is restricted, it has to work harder to get the fuel through the filter. So you run the potential of damaging your fuel pump or wearing your fuel pump out more quickly. So those are some filters that you need to think about servicing, along with the oil filter when you get an oil change. I'm Joe Ferguson. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, like, subscribe, and share it with somebody that you think might be interested. Hey, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And be on the watch out next Friday for Talking Vehicles with Joe.